I've been telling people for years to try the Yakuza games, all the while knowing that deep down I was asking the impossible. I mean, jumping into such a lore-heavy series at its fifth major entry, I know it sounded like crazy talk. With Yakuza 0 though, that's no longer a concern. This is a prequel, it's an origin story, and it's set well before the events of nearly everything that's come in the series since. New players don't need to worry about getting buried under a mountain of politics and intrigue and inter-family drama, because this is ground zero. This is where the whole Yakuza story starts. And it's where you should all be starting, because this is 2017's first great video game. On paper, outsiders who've never enjoyed a Yakuza game must look at this stuff and think that this praise it's kind of crazy. It's a bizarre hybrid of an animated film and a beat 'em up that looks like an ill fit, and any attempt to marry the two is surely going to result in some kind of torn experience. How can you have a fighting game where you barely fight? And how can you try and tell a heartfelt story if you're constantly interrupting it with moments of just absolute comic absurdity? And yet the beauty of Yakuza 0, like its predecessors, is that these disparate elements all come together. It's honest and sincere enough with its saccharine moments that you really do start to care about the characters. But it's just the right kind of stupid throughout to have you expecting that for every moment of tenderness, you're going to be shown some dude later, shaking around his undies talking about jizz, and you will be 100% fine with that dichotomy, just because that's how Yakuza games are. For those who are new to the series, here's how Yakuza 0 basically works. You are taking control of two young Japanese gangsters. One is in Tokyo, the other one's in Osaka. The game's set in these exquisite little dioramas of both of those cities' red light districts, which are really modelled in astonishing detail. So much so that you've got a mini-map there, but you'll soon be navigating your way around based just on the landmarks that you recognise and shop signs that you see. Most of your time is spent either reading or sitting through cutscenes or running around the streets of Tokyo and Osaka between missions. When you actually get to a mission, it usually goes something like this.
あんた組を勝手に殺すのか組長に無断で
寝ぼけてんのかもう親父なんて関係ねえよてめえは組抜けたんだろうが
確かにそうだその言葉待ってたぜ
何てめえ兄貴分に向かって何しやがる
兄貴分だと俺はもうこの組の人間じゃねえあんたさっきそう言ったはずだかかってくんのはあんたらの勝手だがこっちも遠慮なく手出させてもらうクゼの兄貴こいつは俺がやらしてもらいます
任せる好きにしろや
待てあんたにはまだ話がある
俺にはねえどうせお前はここで死ぬんだもし生きて俺んとこまで来られたら話ぐらい聞いてやる
なら首洗って待ってろ覚悟はいいないつでもいいぜ来い
Combat in Yakuza 0 plays out sort of mostly the same as it has to the rest of the series. There's been enough tampering around the edges to encourage series veterans to experiment, but it's mostly the same. It's a very old-fashioned Japanese style of brawler. It's more Devil May Cry than Batman. So you'll either love its fast action and its propensity for combos, or on the other hand, you might just have to grit your teeth and put up with its twitchiness and over-reliance on creating you out with its waves of grunts if you want to get to the stuff that you're sort of really into with this game. It's not a game of surprises or variety. Yakuza games have always played like this, and they probably always will. The Yakuza series is on an annual release schedule in Japan, basically like a sports game is in the West. And so, like people say with sports games here, there's always the argument that if Sega's team spent a little bit longer on the games, maybe 2-3 years on each one instead of one, that they could come up with something a bit more refined around the edges or a bit more modern than simply rehashing the same template over and over each year. That's fine, but I've found that, obviously a lot of the other series fans, especially in Japan, find this as well, that there's a comforting dependability in the Yakuza games, and Yakuza 0 is no different. You know exactly what you're getting when you play this game, and what you're getting is very good. Settling in with a Yakuza game is the same as sitting down with a crime thriller novel or a horror movie. You know what kind of experience you're going to have before you have it. And you don't really care that it's not trying to push boundaries or redefine expectations. Yakuza is it's a Japanese soap opera about some very grim dudes punching each other a lot, and it's very happy and very comfortable in that role. And you can tell how comfortable it is because here, given the chance to tell an origin story for the game's longtime hero, Kazuma Kiryu, series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi has played it about as safe as he possibly could. Kiryu's a cool guy, I guess, he's got a nice suit and shoes and whatever, but he's always been a bit of an empty vessel. He's obviously a clear attempt by Nagoshi to just build this, sort of hollow conduit through which he can project his crime fiction fantasies onto the wider story. That's fine, he serves that purpose well enough. On the other hand, Goro Majima, the game's other playable character, is just the best. He's been a long time sort of frenemy of Kiryu's throughout the series' modern entries, but players don't just get to control him for the first time in a proper Yakuza game here, but we get to see where he came from and what exactly made him such a whack job. His transformation here it's so thorough and so well told that it just completely changes your views on the guy, and his arc and character development is probably the real highlight of the game's story. Okay, so when I said you only watch cutscenes and run around and punch guys, I wasn't being entirely truthful. Those are the things you need to do to complete the game's main story, which is something that should probably take you around 30 to 40 hours if you mainline it. But there's a whole other side to Yakuza 0, and that's the fluff, which not only rounds out the experience of living as a gangster in a certain time and place, in this 80s Japan vibe, but it's at the heart of what makes Yakuza 0 such a great game. Like I've said before, the Yakuza games are just about reveling in contrast. Tonally, 1 second you'll be crying over the body of a dead friend, and then literally 45 seconds later you're doing something silly like helping a busker take a piss, which, yes, is one of the side missions in this game. But the contrast extends to the stuff you can actually do in this game. The main storyline really asks you to do a little more than run a series of errands. It gets you to run around from point A to point B and do a lot of fighting. The rest of the world outside of this has a whole lot more to offer. You can manage a real estate empire, you can control, a fleet of hostesses, you can go bowling, you can play some baseball, you can sing karaoke, you can go to a number of sort of branded Sega arcades, you can even bet on these really strange underground catfights. It's mostly pointless, and it's all utterly ridiculous. Here you are playing as two grown men, up to their necks in this massive conspiracy involving notorious criminal enterprises. You're on the run, you're fighting for your life. Yet here you are wasting hours and hours singing 80s pop music, getting hammered at a bar. There's quests like helping small boys buy video games and trying to catch plush toys from a UFO catcher. Many of that stuff, a lot of that stuff's rudimentary. A lot of these mini games are quite basic, and they feel like they're only there so that Sega can say that they're there, that they can add a little to the game, and they're often quite dull to play. But they're also there to flesh out Yakuza's world, to remind you that everything you're doing in pursuit of your narrative goal is only a small part of a vibrant, living city. The Grand Theft Auto games do something similar with this, but there it makes sense because every GTA game is just one big running joke. Here it makes sense because in Yakuza games, the sincere and the absurd walk hand in hand, and it just wouldn't be a Yakuza game without them. I'm so happy that finally, the arrival of a prequel and the series debut on the PS4 in the West means that people who have put up with me singing Yakuza's praises for years have a great chance now to check it out and really fall in love with one of gaming's most unique and rewarding experiences. But there's also a slight dash of regret that for all of Yakuza 0's accessibility, it's not quite the best foot forward the series could have made with the opportunity. I found Yakuza 4 and 5, which are the last two main entries in the series, were more sprawling affairs, but they were also better games for it. They had larger rosters of playable characters, which gave you these constantly shifting perspectives that it really made the plot move a lot quicker and kept things a lot snappier, and it also provided a chance for more testing combat. Yakuza 0's simplicity in both of those areas cuts both ways here. It's certainly friendlier for newcomers and it's easier to keep track of, but it's the same length as those other games that had more content. So the story really feels like it starts to spin its wheels around 2/3 of the way through. Before a dizzying rush to the finish line at the end over the last couple of chapters, it leaves you wondering why there was so much wasted sort of downtime earlier on. Just because Zero's tale's weaker than probably the last two games, though, it doesn't obviously mean it's written off. This is still a surprisingly competent criminal drama in terms of just something that you watch. It's basically a soap opera. It sets you up with a nice little murder mystery. It gets to work building the genesis of Kiryu and Goro, and then it really neatly ties both storylines together towards the end. A big part of the story's success, which when considered in isolation is pretty laughable, is the game's voice acting, which is absolutely incredible.
Oh, ずいぶん待たしてくれるじゃねえか。偉くなったもんだな。おう、キリ。
申し訳ありません。クゼの兄貴。
こんな昼間から東島組の幹部がガン首揃えてお前を呼び出した理由わかるよな。
カムロ町で見つかった死体の件ですが。
やっぱりてめえか。こりゃゴルどころじゃなくなっちまったな。なあ、クゼの兄貴。
The Yakuza series is always, and this is especially true of the next game, Yakuza 6, it's gone out of its way to recruit famous Japanese actors to play important roles, and that policy continues here. Especially the three Dojima lieutenants, who are sort of the three adversaries that you face all the way through, are made up of a number of sort of A and B list Japanese actors who, they're pretty famous in Japan, and they do an absolutely amazing job here. As does the long-time voice actor for Goro, who's, as you'll see from the highlights and stuff posted through this review, is an absolute nutcase. It's almost impossible to recommend Yakuza 0 by just telling you what it is, because at a superficial level, it just sounds dumb. It's not a GTA clone, it's not an RPG, it's not a brawler. It's something more than those things, but it's also something different. It's a human drama that combines, these game elements that seem rudimentary in isolation, and it does a fantastic job of weaving them together into something that makes you laugh and cry and just genuinely feel things for the characters, over the course of the game and also within the space of minutes at times. Yakuza 0 is the closest thing video games have to a primetime soap opera, really. The only difference here is that instead of families having arguments over a dinner table, it has families going to war over Tokyo real estate and blowing up vans and forcing you to fight in underground gladiator pits and making you visit hostess bars and buy drinks for homeless guys, and you get the idea. Anyway, this has been Luke for Kotaku.com, and until next time, I will see you guys later.